So we are online now, and I'm happy to introduce you to Jonathan Briggs. He is a co-founder of the great digital school Hyper Island, and now he's academic director in Singapore as well. And it's a blessing to have you today right now with us, Jonathan, and thank you to agreeing to talk with us about Hyper's experience.
Well, I'm really glad to be here, and I suppose I feel I'm talking to you from your future, because I'm 5 hours ahead of you. And
yeah, exactly.
It's coming up to the end of my my evening here, but it's been a typical Hyper Island day. And what I hoped I would do over the next 20 or 25 minutes is just share with you what happened when we set up Hyper Island, and what we're trying to do, and what I see some of the things that we're going to do in the future. So let me just tell you a little bit more about myself. Okay, I mean, I suppose the thing I'm known for is starting Hyper Island, and what I must make clear is that there were a group of other people involved, all right? I'm not Swedish, as you can tell, and I was over in Sweden working on a CD-ROM project and met David Eriksson and Lars Lund, my co-founders. And they're the three of us are all responsible, along with a lot of other people. So it's a collaborative effort, and you'll see that collaborative innovation and working in teams is very much part of the sort of ethos of Hyper Island. I wanted to tell you a little bit about myself, and I won't go into huge detail, but I'm a technologist, and I think it's really important that the people who came together to produce Hyper Island were a mixture of different people. David Eriksson really was a creative person. He's still a very creative person, and he was really responsible for the brand and for the public, and the brand in every sense, the brand in a sort of design sense, but also in the cultural sense. And then Lars Lund was responsible for fixing everything: the building, the money, all the difficult stuff. So it really was a partnership. So I came into this as a computer scientist. I taught computer science at a university in London, and I've been a bit of a butterfly in the sense that I've tried to make sure I'm always teaching the things that both students are interested in, and also the things that industry is interested in. And that's changed. So over 25 years, we've seen an enormous change in what computing has meant for people. And I suppose when we started Hyper Island, the big thing was, here was multimedia. Here was a clash or a coming together of television, of, we didn't know it at the time, but later on of telecommunications, of all the things that sort of brought together that mixture of different things. And that was very, very instrumental. So I didn't leave Kingston University. I arranged with my head of department that I should start a number of things while working as an academic. And I did two things. One is I set up an agency called Other Media, still exists. And we did a lot of sort of early multimedia, and then later web, and then later e-commerce, and then later mobile activity. But we also started Hyper Island, and that's been really fun. And I suppose that's what we're going to talk about today. But before I do that, I should just say that I came to Singapore about 4 years ago, and I did leave my academic job. I stopped being an academic. I stopped being an academic at a traditional university, and I've focused 100% on being here an entrepreneur in Asia. Which is very interesting. I just showing the sort of front page of Hyper Island, and it sort of gives you a sense of what we do. We run courses. I think everybody knows that, but we run two different types of courses. We run courses for individuals and for students, and we also run industry courses. I've been working on a course today with McDonald's. And that's quite typical. It's quite typical for us to have a day that is about students and then may also be about industry. And I think, as you'll see, it's that combination of industry and industry needs, and working with young people is very, very important to us. Do stop me and ask any questions if you want to. I'm very happy to answer questions.
Yeah, I actually have one question. We heard in Russia some kind of rumor about Hyper Island that it is a Harvard for a digital world. Would you say so? And what is so special about Hyper Island?
I'm always embarrassed when people say, you know, nice things about you. I'm British, and so I find that I struggle with that. It was one of our participants on a masterclass who said that he had a sort of life-changing experience by coming and working with us, and I think that you know, it's very gratifying to hear those sorts of statements. And I think what we set out to do when we built Hyper Island was to create something a little bit special. And there's a sort of number of ingredients which I'll talk about, which I think were quite unusual at the time. And we're not the only people doing the sort of mixture of things, but I think we were quite early in doing that. And I think we created something quite unique, which is what I'm excited about. But let me tell you a little bit more about the history, because that's another thing that people sort of remember us for. We started life in an old naval prison. So Hyper Island, people often say, why was it called Hyper Island? And the answer was, it was on an island. And the island is a small island off the southeast coast of Sweden in a place called Karlskrona. And Karlskrona was one of those towns in Europe that was going through a change. I mean, it used to be a military town, and Sweden was demilitarizing. And it had an old military prison going spare. And Lars Lund discovered the prison and really liked it. And I remember I got a call from him, and I went over and saw the prison and thought, yes, this is a perfect building. So we bought it. We still have it. It's on the island. We called it Hyper Island because we wanted to have something which was about the future. And I suppose it could have been called Future Island or Cyber Island or all sorts of other things. But Hyper Island stuck, and it's done us very well because people are always puzzled as to what it is. Here in Singapore, when we first arrived, I think people thought we might teach people about running spas. I think they thought that, you know, spas and boutiques were what we did. But I like the fact there's a story to tell. And I think one of the things that Hyper Island's been good about is keeping a little bit mysterious and having those stories. And I'm very proud of that. So we started there, and I suppose we ran under the radar. People didn't know about us for a few years while we sort of polished what we were doing. And then later we went to Stockholm and opened a second campus in Stockholm, a slightly bigger campus, where our headquarters and our CEO are now based in Telefonplan. And we graduated a few hundred students. And then people began to say to us, we really like your students. We really want to have more of them, but we don't really understand what they know. Is there a way you could do your courses much more quickly? Could you run a 1 year or a course in a few days? And so we started offering courses to industry as well. And Unilever, for example, is a big partner of ours. We worked a lot with them. And we started to run these 3-day courses. So what I've been doing with McDonald's here in Singapore this week is running one of these short courses, and they're quite common. And what we try and do is give a flavor of the Hyper Island experience. It's clearly not a full 1 year or 2 year course, but it is it's a good taste of what we do. And so we started to do that about 6 or 7 years ago. And then about 2 or 3 years ago, we started to work much more internationally, including in Russia. And we started to open up a presence in other places. So we have an office in New York, a school in New York. We have a school in partnership with Google. And then we have an office in Brazil. And I'm based in our Asia office, or our Asia campus, which is the 4th picture on that slide. And it's very like the old days back in the prison. It's not a prison. It's it's a nice building, but it's a very flexible space. We're able to do lots of different things in there. So that's about Hyper Island. It's been a slow burn. We've not opened 50 offices around the world, but over the last nearly 20 years, we've gradually reached out into most parts of the world. And as well as having bases in particular places, we've also we've gone out and visited lots of places. So I have a trip to Australia in about 4 weeks' time, and we have teams who go all over the world doing bits and pieces for us, and usually these shorter courses. So I wanted to go on and say what was it we were trying to do, and as I said, it came from a realization that computing and television and creativity and all these other things were coming together. And I suppose I dreamt of I worked in a technology department, and I sort of dreamt of a business school that was also a design school, that was also a technology school, without the normal barriers between those subjects. And that's really what we tried to build, something that was truly cross-disciplinary. And I think that's been true for Hyper Island all the time. If you come and look at our courses, some of them are slightly more orientated towards business or slightly more orientated to design, but there's always a blend of these different things. You're always getting a mixture. There's
Just
one other thing. Yeah,
one more question, just to make it clear. When you say design in Russia, normally we kind of confuse with this word. And by meaning design, we normally see some kind of pictures or visualization. Is it the same problem for like Singapore or Europe or America? Or you're thinking about that as prototyping or creating, building something?
It's all of those. So I think what we talked about, and as I say, I think if you think about an art school plus a business school plus a technology school, you get the good mix. But you're right, the word design today is very different from the word design in the past. It now encompasses the design of products or the design of services. So, working out what Uber should be like for a consumer is very much a design problem. That will clearly have a branding and a graphical identity story. So I don't want to lose the sort of picture quality, because that's very important, whether we're working in on a mobile phone or whether we're working on a PC. But it's absolutely true that design is much more than just art, but design includes the creative, visual, and maybe interactive elements that would be common in a design course. So it's mixing those things up and perhaps not worrying too much about where the boundaries are. So our design, we would have a very broad view of what design was. In our course here in Singapore that we're running, the part-time master's course we run, we've just run we're just in the middle of a module on design thinking. And that's really about the process of design. Again, there will be some branding and some creative stories around that. But it is definitely bigger than just the graphical or the art part of what design is about. So you're right there. I was going to add one more ingredient, and it's an ingredient that some people, even at Hyper Island, won't actually understand the history of, and that is that fairly early in the life of Hyper Island, probably within the first year and a half, we bought a small company from the Swedish military. And it was a company that taught leadership. The Swedish used to run a national service, and they stopped doing that. And that was one of the things that used to happen in Karlskrona, where we were with our prison. And there were some really good trainers on the market at the time, and we bought a few people who really specialized in sort of models of leadership. And we added that. So we now had technology, we had business, we had design, and we had leadership. And I think the leadership piece is such an important part of what we do. And certainly if I look at the work we're involved with across the world now, it is a very strong piece of what we're doing, is giving people the confidence to work in a digital world. So I think for lots of companies and for lots of individuals, the world is very scary. It's a world where their jobs are not necessarily secure, where they're being asked to do all sorts of new things. And I think while the design and the technology and the creativity are important, perhaps the issues around leadership are even more important. And by leadership, we mean the management of groups, we mean how people support each other as teams, we mean the sort of the strategies and behaviors of groups of people. And I think that's a very, very big part of our secret sauce. Excuse me. Is how we engage teams and how we get people to be effective, both in running teams and also participating in teams. So that's a big part of what we do.
Can I also ask you about the leadership? In my opinion and also in my experience, I'm teaching young designers, and they normally or usually asking me, what's the point to have the skills about leadership or group dynamic, because I'm a freelancer or I want to be a freelancer and I don't want to be involved in a relationship with a team. So what's the point for me to build these skills?
So I think when we're talking about digital services, even relatively simple digital services are likely to be the product of teams of people. I think art is sometimes something you can produce on your own. But I think if you look at any endeavor, if you look at designing a new business or designing a new service, designing something which is powerfully interactive, the chances are you'll do it with a group of people. Of course, there are some people who do it on their own. But I would see digital projects today as being very much like making movies. And I think that by guiding people to work in teams and getting the best out of those teams, we have a much stronger career ahead of people than we do if we're allowing people simply to be individuals. I still want strong individuals, but I think it's strong individuals working in powerful teams is the story. Okay. My slide says that what we're trying to do is build future creative leaders and change agents for a disrupted digital world, and that's perhaps what we are trying to do. When we talk about leadership, I think it's one of the skills we're trying to give. We're not imagining that everybody's going to be a project manager. So even if you're going to be 100% creative, I think one of the things we feel very strongly is that you need to be able to view your own work from a different perspective. You need to be able to look at your work in relationship to technologists or in relationships to people who sell your work or work with clients on your behalf. So I think it's about those relationships are very important. And I think if I go around and meet a lot of companies, actually I meet a lot of people who are not very good at working with other people. And I think sometimes the failure of projects, be it digital or not, is often because they don't have a view of how the other person sees the world. So I think that this leadership piece is perhaps a particularly key to us.
Can we also talk a bit about the disrupted digital world and also in terms of digital education for designers? Do you think this is the area of disruption right now and what's going on there?
So I think disruption is absolutely everywhere. I think we are seeing it in the sharing economy. We're seeing new ways of doing old things. We're seeing new ways of doing new things. We're seeing an agility in lots of new companies that's just not there in old companies. New business models. We're seeing the consumer change. Here in Asia, we have a very rapid take-up of mobile phones. And for many people, they will use mobile phones before they ever use a computer. So we've sort of jumped ahead. And that means that, you know, if I've not lived in an urban world, and in the last 10 years I've moved into a Chinese megacity, and I am now, my life is completely different. I'm now suddenly online and connected. I'm shopping online. I'm communicating online. My healthcare is mediated that way. My world is completely different. And I think one of the reasons I particularly jumped at the idea of coming out to Asia was because I wanted to see what that world felt like. And one of the interesting things here is that the world is extremely similar in lots of ways to the rest of the world, and yet it's also completely different. It's running at a different speed. I think particularly in China, you just feel the speed is completely different. And I know there are other places in the world, including Russia, where there's also been huge change and huge change in speed, and Brazil is the same. But I think for many Western designers, they haven't really seen that. And I think the same is true in the US, that people assume that China is going to have to go through all the stages of modernization that North America went through. And of course, they're jumping ahead. I read about a group of people, for example, in India, who are going to have mobile phone service before they have television. So about 100 million people will actually have mobile phones before they have television. And it's that sort of thing that's really disrupting the way we do things. So I think what Hyper Island is about, it's about creating people who can be effective operators in that world, who can guide other people, who can view the world from multiple different disciplines and multiple different perspectives, and really help create the world of the future. And that can be at a very small level or a very big level. It can be within a small community or within a small company, or it can be affecting change at a much, much bigger level. And that's what's so exciting about the people who pass through us, right, in lots of ways. I want to go on and talk a little bit about how we teach and what we teach, because that's very much part of my background and also part of what we designed when we put into Hyper Island. And the first thing is that I'm a constructivist, all right? That means that I believe that the only way we can learn effectively is by doing stuff. I was very lucky to learn science at school by doing a lot of experimentation. And when I first started in my career, I worked with history educators, looking at how you could learn history by actively doing stuff. And that very much is the sort of central ethos of Hyper Island. How can you learn stuff by making things? Now, in some senses, you make stuff, but you also need people around you to guide you and mentor you and provide you with guidance as to how you do things. So learning by doing is central to the way we teach and learn at Hyper Island. The second thing is that in order to help us do that in a really interesting way, we bring in clients. And those clients are real clients with really interesting projects. So there's a project running in Singapore at the moment, which is for an agency called McCann Health. And McCann Health is a part of the McCann worldwide organization. But they specialize in healthcare, and they work with all of the major healthcare brands and companies. And they've set our students a challenge, and that is, how can we help people, particularly mothers, make choices around breastfeeding and infant formula? Okay, now that's the sort of problem that they would love to have time to spend themselves. Okay, but it's a real problem, because what's happened is that every brand is basically competing on the same terms. And what I think Hyper Island students are able to do is to look at it with a completely new view. And that's it. So we're working with client briefs that often can't be done by the clients themselves. And you know, we've worked with our industry partners across the world to bring interesting projects to our students. And our students love it. The companies love it. And it's very exciting, because we can get results that are very creative, or results that are developing new businesses, and sometimes they're very technical. So you know, the outcomes are really quite unpredictable. But it's a big part of what we do, is working with companies to make that happen. The third thing I've suggested here is that we don't teach Photoshop and we don't teach Illustrator. What we try and teach is transferable skills. Of course, our students use Photoshop and Illustrator or their equivalents. I mean, it would be impossible for them not to. But we don't set out to teach a tool or a skill. What we teach is the thinking that you can use to apply to learn lots of different things. So we're giving people the confidence to become independent learners. And I think that that's always been the case. So as the technology has changed, so have we, but we haven't had to replace, you know, programming in programming language X with programming in programming language Y, because that's not really the ethos of what we try and do. We will expect people to do some development, some prototyping. They will use whatever tools that are around. They may have to go and learn some stuff for themselves. But those transferable skills, the problem-solving skills, the thinking skills, we see as being much more important than the low-level skills. Often the students come with those low-level skills anyway, so it's a good possibility. The final bubble there is another part of very much the way we construct learning, and that is around feedback and review and reflection. And I suppose what we did when we started developing the Hyper Island was to go and look at the very best we could find from different disciplines. And so, you know, in an art school, you'd expect art criticism to be part of the way we're teaching. That's not how computer science is taught, and it's not how business is taught. But we're taking some of those ideas and applying it in all aspects of this. Project reviews, regular sitting down and saying, okay, what have we learned? Let's reconstruct what we've learned is a big part of what we do, as well as giving and receiving feedback. And you might be surprised to know we actually teach people to receive feedback as well as to give it. Because often what happens when you get feedback is you're immediately defensive. And what you do is you start arguing with the person giving you feedback. And so we look at feedback in a very particular way, and we're encouraging people to listen and to really listen to what's being said, and perhaps to use that as a way of building the next version of what they're trying to do, rather than rejecting feedback and seeing it as a criticism. So those are four very, very important parts of what we're trying to do. Learning by doing, client briefs, transferable skills, and then this active reflection and feedback as part of our learning.
Jonathan, would you say that based on these bubbles, in the end of the course for the designers, they will not only have soft skills like reflection or better communication, but they also will have real cases from real clients? And
absolutely.
This is good.
Absolutely. And we are still in a position where our graduates are extremely sought after. And indeed, one of the reasons I think people get quite excited about coming and giving us briefs and working with our students is they get to meet the students early on. And the result of that is the students get snapped up very quickly into jobs and things. It's a completely open door to industry. And by industry, I don't just mean commercial companies, to startups, to small businesses, to entrepreneurs. What we try and do is create a situation where lots of different people actually pass through all of our campuses and are available to guide our students and work with them. We've got a very brilliant growth hacker in town this week working with us. And you know, we've got 120 people coming to an evening session that he is running tomorrow. And a lot of those people will have been to Hyper Island events in the past, but we're running these sort of events. I'm a little bit like you do, but we see it very, very much as a community of people, a networked community of people who are you know, interesting and worth getting involved with. I wanted to add one more element to this, and it's an element I've been very involved with coming here to Singapore, and that is we've increasingly realized going outside Europe particularly, that international recognition is becoming very important, and not just a brand. Having a good brand is excellent, and we certainly have a good brand, but today I think it's becoming more and more important to also offer a qualification. So we've done an interesting partnership with Teesside University in the northeast of England, which is we've asked them to accredit our master's degree, which means that if you come to Manchester or London or Singapore, and hopefully soon other places, not only can you come and have the Hyper Island experience, but you can actually have an accredited Master of Arts course. And increasingly in Asia, in order to have the mobility to be able to go from one Asian country to another, you have to have a Master of Arts. So that's been a big part of my work over the last 3 or 4 years, is to help our team in the UK make sure that we have a good relationship with Teesside University. And increasingly, we're looking at other university relationships that may grow over time. But I don't see us as being not too much of an island. I see us as having bridges to other parts of the world and other parts of the industry and other parts of academia. And I think that's another big part of what we do. I wanted to go on and talk about some of the things that are interesting us at the moment, and might interest some of the people with you. I think we're very involved with cascading our learning to other people, and we're being asked by a lot of commercial companies to help them not only come and do our courses, but actually then to build courses that then get passed on to other people. So we've been working with banks, we've been working with publishers, we've been working with travel companies, where training the trainers becomes a big part of that. And I can see that, I can see passing the design thinking and the technology thinking down is becoming very important. I think increasingly we're being asked to package what we do so that other people can use it, and building toolkits around what we're doing is quite interesting. And we have some R&D activities across the world looking at that, and I'm particularly interested in that. That doesn't mean we'll necessarily offer our courses online, because the human face-to-face piece is so important. But I can imagine a situation in the not too distant future where you'll be able to come and study at Hyper Island, maybe for a short time, maybe for longer, but you'll then be able to keep in touch and get more and keep refreshed using tools that we provide online. But that's an aspiration we have. And the final thing is, I think we're getting asked a lot to think about more flexible study, how we can help companies offer long-term 2-year projects of training. And again, in Singapore, we've been particularly looking at part-time study. Singapore is a wonderfully small place, and by offering courses that are come for 3 days every 3 or 4 weeks, we rebuild that community, and then they go back into work, and then they come back together with us. And I think that flexible study. So if you were to say to me, where is design education going to go in the Hyper Island way? I think increasing flexibility, increasingly how we learn, where we learn, and the duration of things is going to change. I put in 2 slides just to sort of illustrate that. One is a Hyper Island toolbox that we've been involved with, which is to try and curate some of the things that we've created over the last 20 years and share those with other people so that other people can use them. And we've got lots of work around that. So the Hyper Island toolbox is certainly worth having a look at. And recently, I've been personally trying to package up some of our work. One of the big ideas at the moment in design thinking is customer centricity. And I'm a particular fan of the jobs to be done framework. And so I've been trying to look at how to help teach jobs to be done, and have produced, it's a good example. I went to my managing director here in Singapore and asked her for some money to print the training materials we'd created, and she said no. And I thought, I have to solve this in some other way. So I asked my students how we should solve it, and they suggested that we all collaborate on a Kickstarter project. So we created a Kickstarter project, we made a video, we put the product up online in Kickstarter, and we raised the money. We raised more than we needed. And it's that wonderful feeling, which is living by the Hyper Island idea, which is that doing it is better than, you know, solving it just by having somebody else fix it for you. And I learned so much again about digital, you know, simply by participating and being part of that. But I can see lots more of those sorts of things. If I listen to the Hyper Island community and what we're trying to do, there are so many experiments that people want to do, whether they be students or staff or industry partners. And it's a very, very exciting place to be. And that's why, you know, 20 years on, do I feel I want to stop this? Not at all. You know, I want to make it bigger and get more involved with it. I had 7 things I just wanted to finish off with. That just, then we can talk. As I say, I think designing across cultures is a big issue. I think you mentioned the different meanings of design. And I see the sort of Hyper Island way of doing things as being very interesting, but I think we have to think about culture, and that's cultures, international cultures, and how you create things that fit in different places. But it's also within different company cultures and within different organizational cultures. But that's a big part of why I'm in Asia and why I'm doing that. I think we have to ask a question about how technical our students need to be. 20 years ago, one of the designing principles was that they didn't need to be very technical. And I think that's still mainly true. But I think we need to encourage designers of all kinds to feel that they can master the technology. Because if they don't master the technology, they may lock themselves out of some of the things that they want to do. So, you know, let's suppose we look ahead a few years and we imagine a world which has got a big, strong idea around virtual reality. You know, let's suppose the Oculus Rift becomes a major product, which it probably will do. Actually building inside a 3D world, doing good 3D modeling and being able to not only do the modeling, but also understand the programming behind that, making things active and intelligent. I think that will require designers to be perhaps a little bit more technical than we've required in the past. So I'm certainly looking forward to a situation where we take people who are quite afraid of being technical and helping them become a bit more technical. The third thing is around user experience and design patterns. And as I say, one of the things we're hearing from everybody is that putting the consumer or the human being at the center of design is absolutely key. We've launched a digital experience design course in Manchester, which we may start running in other parts of the world. But I think even if we don't run it in other parts of the world, this idea around user experience design and design patterns that work is going to be very important. Number 4 is about entrepreneurial thinking and startups. And that's not very surprising. I think everybody's recognizing the importance of the sort of entrepreneurial world. I think one of the things we're interested in is how you take that into a more corporate world. How do you get big companies to think like startups? And so that was my 4th things we're currently thinking about inside our organization. The 5th is about the maker movement and the whole idea about making things and fabrication and physical objects. And I think the physical world is definitely back. What with sensors and smart buildings and all those sorts of things. I think the link between the physical world and the digital world is never going to be more important than it is in the future. All right. I think we're seeing objects being turned into data and data being turned back into objects. Number 6 is about networked organizations and how you help organizations become more learning organizations and also how they operate using the networks in fantastically interesting ways. There's a real interest at the moment in how organizations need to change their management structures and their leadership structures. So leadership is a strong flavor of ours, as I've already indicated. But I think the future of leadership is going to be around leading networks rather than leading traditional hierarchical organizations. And that makes that interesting. And the final thing is building on the work of others. I think we've seen beautiful things happening in the open source movement and in the Creative Commons movement. And today, if you're starting something, you don't have to start from zero. You can start with many of the pieces already made by other people. And that, I think, is a fantastic gift to designers. You don't have to take a blank sheet of paper. You may want to, but I think the opportunity to start with something that other people have already created is really, really powerful. And those are some of the things that we're going to be, I think, thinking about over the next 10 years or so.
Oh, thank you so much, Jonathan. And as long as we don't have any more time, I just want to ask you one more question about the future of design, and especially as a designer job title, digital designer job title. What do you think will go or keep this job as a headliner, or what do you need to do as a designer right now, or learn something, maybe
I can't imagine you being a designer without being a digital designer. So I see we'll drop the word digital from that title, because everybody will be working in some way, either using digital tools or for a digital world, or designing for digital products and services. So I think that's the first thing. I think that, as I've suggested, designers have to learn more about the other parts of the world in which they interoperate. They need to be part of effective teams. They need to understand how new businesses are going to be powered by their designs, and how they can improve existing things. I think if you look at web designers, for example, they often want to scrap everything that somebody has already done and start from zero. And actually, very, very few, it's like blowing up a building. Most of the time, we can't have that luxury. Sometimes we will, but most of the time, we're not going to be able to do that. And I think designers have to, it's a very exciting time for them, but I think they have to rethink how they work with other people. And that's been one of the big challenges of design education, is not only how do we teach people to have all these different skills and design for the future that's definitely there, but also how they work with other people to make those happen, rather than working on their own.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And thank you so much again. And if anyone will have questions, can I just link to you or your colleagues?
Absolutely. Please do. Yeah, we're happy to talk to you. All right.
Thank you so much again.